From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. We're going to get started. My name is Linda Riley. I'm a program specialist in the Office of Workforce Management and Development of the Congressional Research Service. I am also the very proud chair of the Library of Congress Organization of Employees with Disabilities. It is my pleasure, immense pleasure, to welcome you to our event today, entitled Because We Are Equal to the Task, a program on the experiences of people with disabilities. Let me give you a little history about OED. It began in April of 2007 when a bunch of employees with disabilities began a brown bag lunch series to share their experiences and to talk about ultimately forming a recognized Library of Congress organization. That happened on June 23rd, 2009. Like this? Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, indulge me. I want to read the mission statement, OED's mission statement. It's to, and I quote, to assist those with present and future disabilities to have a clearinghouse of information on workplace accommodations, universal design, programs, and services at the Library of Congress. And I focus on the word future disabilities, because you see, in creating OED, its organizers were thinking about me and perhaps you too. And I'm glad they did. In 2007, when I looked into my personal crystal ball, I did not see disability on the horizon. My body saw differently. On April 25th, 2009, I underwent a total replacement of my right hip. On October 12th, 2010, total replacement of my left hip. I now saw myself as a person with a limiting condition that required adjustment in my personal and work life. In the earlier days, the cane became my constant companion. It now rests in my office. And when I returned to work, climbing the steps could be challenging, so I used the accessibility ramps indoors and restroom facilities. I also requested an ergonomic assessment and was approved for an ergonomic chair. These were all things that facilitated my return to work. I'm glad they were in place. I was a beneficiary of provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I am also pleased to report that there is a working group tasked by the library-wide Human Capital Planning Board that is working on a 13-point ADA action plan. I am a member of that working group, and I think good work will result from our efforts. In closing, serving as chair of OED has been and continues to be an honor and a privilege. I don't know why I'm weepy.
It's all right, you're with friends.
It has enhanced my understanding of people with different physical, mental, and medical conditions who all make meaningful contributions to the workforce, who conduct themselves at work with dignity and respect, and want to be full participants in the workforce. I'm going to close with some stats. As of September 30th, 2012, there were 187 employees with a self-identified disability, accounting for 5.4% of the library's workforce. That number is understated. I, for one, am not included in that number. You see, when I joined the library on February 1st, 1999, disability was probably the last thing on my mind. However, because of its newfound prominence, I will take action to make sure that I am counted by completing Form SF 256. This is the Self-Identification of Disability form. You can complete it by going to your employee personal page. I encourage you to do so. Let's give the library an accurate count about the composition of its workforce. Stand up and be counted. It can make a difference. Disabled employees all count in making the library's workforce diverse and inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. This is not the day for weeping. We are here to thank every veteran, every disabled person who are contributing to our society, who are contributing to this country years after years. So I'm here to say thank you to all of you. Good afternoon. Honorable Congresswoman Tammy Duckworth, Dr. Billington, Karen Keninger, our distinguished guests and attendees. This is my honor to be here at the podium today. Every year on this month, we come here to say thank you to all our veterans. If we just say thank you and stop right there, that won't be enough. But still, I think I should take my opportunity to say thank you on behalf of the Asian American Association of the Library of Congress. I happen to be the president of this association. This is not the only purpose why I'm here today. We also want to acknowledge the contribution of our disabled colleagues to these institutions year after year. Statistics shows that almost 6% of the Asian American Asian staff are voluntarily declared to be disabled, which is very encouraging compared to our national standard. So I thank the institution itself for giving us the opportunity to work with our head held high, no matter whether we are disabled or able. We are all equal to our task. Thank you.
So hard. Thank you. It's my pleasure. Oh, thank you.
Well, I want to thank Linda Riley and all of you, members of the OED, the Library of Congress Organization of Employees with Disabilities. It's very important that we listen and learn from people with disabilities here at the Library of Congress. Today, we'll also hear words from persons with disabilities speaking to us through our Library of Congress collections, including excerpts of archived recordings from the StoryCorps and the Veterans History Project. That's the largest oral history project ever in American history. And one of the most inspiring parts of it, actually, we celebrated yesterday the legacy of Senator Daniel Inouye, who was such a marvelous example of someone who with a continuing disability, which he turned almost into, as people in the disability community are fond of saying the ability within the word disability. He was a marvelous example, and we're really deeply honored to have with us a very special person in Representative Tammy Duckworth, who I'll introduce in just a minute. But let me say that speaking through our collections, as I mentioned, and finally closing the program with Karen Keninger, Director of the National Library Service of the Blind and Physically Handicapped, which is one of the really great services. We had a maternal grandmother that was blind, and she lived with us, with our family, and she was, as she often said, this was before I was connected with the Library of Congress, that national service really prolonged her life for about 10 years. She died a couple weeks short of what would have been her 105th birthday. So all up and down the line, this is such a marvelous program, such a marvelous cause. And so we'll hear from her to close it. But, and just let me mention one more moment. I mean, I think the people that keep these buildings clean and work is an organization for people with disabilities. And I think that's one of our most positive accomplishments, that we are able to give employment to people who've, I think, proven themselves, and we've all come to admire them, particularly if we stay late and see them coming in to clean up our act. It's a great group. I have to say that really probably my closest friend in life, so let me skip to any further things about this, and just say that Representative Duckworth, the vote is coming up, and we've got to get you in the place of honor that you deserve. As you know, she was deployed to Iraq as a Black Hawk helicopter pilot for the Illinois Army National Guard. Once there, she flew 120 combat hours over 8 months till November 12th, 2004, on that date when she was co-piloting. On the return from a mission, insurgents fired a rocket-propelled grenade at the helicopter. Her remarkable career, all she's done. There's a whole page here I should read, but because she's also a member of our Congress, a spectacular human being. Ladies and gentlemen, Tammy Duckworth.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. I apologize. They moved up votes to a quarter after, so I have 15 minutes from the time they call votes. I got staff nervously pacing in the back when that happens. Get out of my way, because this wheelchair is flying down the sidewalk to the Capitol. But I am thrilled to be here. I want to thank the Librarian of Congress and all of the members of the Library of Congress for your work in acknowledging the accomplishments of men and women living with disabilities. And it's especially encouraging to see the library's work with the Veterans History Project to pay tribute to our heroes. This is a really important time for persons with disabilities, not just here in the US, but globally. I don't know if you are sort of keeping track with what's happening in the Senate, but the US failed to ratify the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities last year. And it is going to be up for a vote again, and hopefully we will ratify it. Over 100 other nations have ratified this convention, which is based on our very own ADA. And so we don't have a seat at the head of the table internationally when we talk about the rights of persons living with disabilities if we as a nation has not even ratified the convention itself. So hopefully that'll pass, because I think about how much the ADA has affected my life and has affected many of our lives. If not now, then at some point in the future. Hopefully everybody here lives into ripe old ages, and at some point we're all going to need to use canes, we're all going to need to use walkers, we're all going to need to have access to places we want to go but may be mobility impaired. We may develop cognitive issues. These are all part of being human, and it's what makes us wonderful, but it's also what should unite us as a community of people. That is, we care for one another. 23 years ago, Senator Tom Harkin, along with Senators Bob Dole and Ted Kennedy, worked very hard to pass along also on the House side with Steny Hoyer, worked very hard to pass the ADA. And in fact, if you were here at that time, leading up to the vote, members of the disability community actually crawled up the steps of the Capitol to show how their nation's capital was not accessible to people with disabilities. And I was so proud earlier this year to be able to climb up those steps and stand and wait for Senator Mark Kirk on his return to the Senate after a very disabling stroke and a year in therapy. So we've come a long way. We have a long way to go. Right now, when veterans travel abroad, and we have literally hundreds of thousands of veterans using the post 9/11 GI Bill to go back to school. And when these students travel abroad on a travel abroad program, so if they graduate and they're looking for jobs and they want to travel abroad, they don't find the rest of the world as accessible as the United States is and find themselves limited. I went to Landstuhl, Germany to visit troops who were recovering there. And while there, we had about a 4-hour window, and I said, hey, we've got the van. Can I take some of these guys who maybe are well enough to leave the hospital to go down and see the castle down there in the village, or go to the little farmer's market and just get a break from the hospital? Because I remember how bad it was. And can you just give them a 4-hour pass and we'll bring them back? And the leadership said we would be happy to do that, except that the village is not accessible to wheelchairs. And this is Germany. This is a developed nation, a leader of the Eurozone, and they're not accessible. So if Germany isn't, you can only imagine what the rest of the world and the developing world is facing. Too often in communities around the world, people who live with disabilities are treated differently. They are an embarrassment to their families. They are shut away in their homes. They are not given access to basic accommodations that allow them to live very full and productive lives. I was in Thailand a few years back. I went recently this year, but a few years back I went and I met a wheelchair basketball team, which I was very thrilled to meet. And all of the people that were in wheelchairs, and I was chatting with them, and half of them were folks who have just a single leg below knee amputation, and they were living their lives in wheelchairs. And in the amputee community here in the US, we make fun of the below knee single leg amputees. We call them paper cut kids. Because in the world of I know it's shocking, but it's the macabre humor, but it's true. I mean, they need to just stop whining. It's just, half of a leg below the knee, you do have the knee, you're fine. But here, it's nothing. You live absolutely, full, productive lives. You can do everything. And because we have the ADA and we have access through our healthcare to accommodate the devices we need to live our lives. And yet, when I go overseas, I see people who can't even do the most basic things like move around their own homes because of lack of access to medical devices. So, I'm glad to be here, especially in the Library of Congress, because you do a work that is so important to our nation, but you do it in a way that makes it so much easier for persons with disabilities to have fulfilling jobs and be contributing members, right? It's in the Army, when I first joined the Army, I got really mad at my National Guard Army maintenance crew because they put in all these these wheelchair parking spots. Because by law, under the ADA, if you have a certain number of people working there, you have to have so many handicap accessible parking slots. And I was mad because this is the Army. Nobody's in the Army who's disabled. And if you're disabled, you're not supposed to be in the Army anyway, so why would we need to waste all of these parking spots? Let me tell you, if somebody parks in one of those parking spots now, I am all over them. I am all over them. Like, get out of the handicap parking spots. You never know when it's going to be you. And I learned, and we've learned as a nation, from the time that I enlisted 23 years ago to where we are now, the military now has veterans and service members who have disabilities. In fact, over 60 of us with amputations have redeployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. There's a program started by President Bush called the COAD and COAR programs, which is continuation on active duty or active reserve status, which is what allows me to continue to serve to this day in the Illinois National Guard as an actively drilling guardsman. But it's those programs that we see the worth in the individual and we don't see the disability first. And oftentimes I think that we overlook the things that disabilities do to make you stronger and more competitive and more innovative. If you have spent your whole life problem solving around the disabilities that you live with, Am I getting that? Did they call votes? All right, I'm getting it. You know, if you spend your entire life problem solving just to live your life, you're going to be a better problem solver in all the other aspects of your life, such as in the workplace. And this makes our nation stronger. I want to belong to a nation, the nation that I help to protect and defend, one where everyone has equal access, one where everyone has a chance at the American dream, one where someone with a disability gets to live their lives to the fullest of their potential to what they want to be, because I want them to have a job and I want them to pay taxes. Rather than be locked up in their homes and not have access. So I think that the work that you do here, the work that we do as a nation is good, but we have a long way to go. I do apologize. They've called votes. I have 15 minutes to get there. It has to do with natural resources, I think. You know, we're probably fighting over whether or not we should cut down forest lands or something. But I'm going to get in my wheelchair, row down the sidewalk where there are curb cuts with my ADA aid so that I can go do my job representing all the people in my district and the people of the United States, not just the ones who don't have disabilities. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bob Patrick. I'm the director of the Veterans History Project here at the Library of Congress. At the end of World War II, war correspondent Eric Severide said this. He said, "War happens inside of a man. It happens to one man alone. That is a tragedy and perhaps the blessing. And that's why you and your sons, and I should probably also add daughters, will be forever strangers to you." For the last 13 years, the Veterans History Project has been trying to, and I think very successfully, trying to make sure that the veterans of our wars from the 20th century and 21st century are not strangers to us. Congress gave us a mandate 13 years ago to collect and preserve and make accessible the wartime memories of America's veterans. That's all veterans, no matter what service they're in, no matter what capacity they served in, no matter where they served. We've been doing that, as Dr. Billington said, at a very good clip. We have over 90,000 collections now, again, from World War I all the way up to the current conflict. We have done this through collecting oral histories of veterans sitting down with volunteers, with someone in their family, someone they know, someone maybe they don't know, and talking about their experience, talking about the human experience of war. We've also been collecting photographs, letters, diaries to help supplement that story. One group of veterans that we have focused on has been disabled veterans. We think it is important that veterans, as I just mentioned, who have gone through war, who carry stories with them that may be very painful, that they be given an opportunity to tell that story, to tell their story in their own way, through their own way, on their own time. And I will tell you that we have been doing that through, again, a number of volunteer organizations that probably you're familiar with. The Department of Veterans Affairs has been very helpful with us. We have been working with hospice organizations. We have been working with retirement communities to talk to some of these older veterans and have them tell their stories. And they've been, in some cases, very cathartic experience for those veterans. They've been given, as we like to call, a serious way to tell that story. We time and time again hear stories from families about when a veteran tells their story of, we've never heard that before. He's never talked about this. This is a woman who's been married to him for 60 years. And so we think we're providing a great service to veterans who may not look outwardly disabled, but inwardly disabled, but not having the opportunity to tell their story. I will tell you that these are not all stories of pain and anguish. There are also stories of victory, stories of meeting the challenge, stories of living a life of normalcy. And today we're going to show you a couple of examples of what those stories are, and one of them is our guest speaker today. But let me also add one other thing. And Dr. Billington, you called me about 18 months ago and said Mrs. Billington had met a gentleman down on the mall by the name of Tim Nugent. Not Ted Nugent, Tim Nugent. Tim Nugent was a World War II veteran who went off to war and came back to the States. He had a background in rehab. And he was called to the University of Illinois because at the end of World War II, veterans who were disabled could not take advantage of their GI Bill because University officials said that they were a liability, they were a distraction, and believe it or not said, well, what were they going to do with their education once they got it anyway? Tim Nugent set up a program, and you can look it up on the internet, that gave veterans accessibility to the University of Illinois. It's a long story. But when Congresswoman Duckworth was talking about curb cuts, guess who started curb cuts? University of Illinois, Tim Nugent. Who started ramps? Who started lifts? All this we see today and take for advantage was due to a World War II veteran. And we have that story in our project, and hopefully you will take a look at it and see where it all started. Right now, I'd like to introduce the two video clips that we have today. One is with Ms. Duckworth, who was mentioned earlier, was injured during her time in Iraq. This particular interview was done several years ago when she was with the Department of Veterans Affairs. And the second one is a Vietnam veteran who lost his hand in Vietnam and talks in a very compelling way about what his experience was shortly after the war and then what it has been for the rest of his life. So let me play those.
Is there any other things that you would like to add that we haven't covered in this interview?
No, I think the only thing that I want to say is people often look on me and my injuries and want to feel sorry for me or for my fellow wounded warriors. And I don't want people to feel, I don't think it's pity, but I don't want people to feel bad for me. I'm happy with where I am. I'm proud of my service. If my legs grew back and I was told that I needed to go back to Iraq, I would go. And if I needed to get blown up again in service for my country, I'll go get blown up again. So I'm proud of where I am, and I'm happy to be where I am right now in my life, and I have no regrets. And if you talk to most of our wounded warriors, they would say the same thing. The privilege of wearing the uniform, the privilege of serving this country, the privilege of having worked next to some of the most amazing men and women are all worth it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to meet you, and we're really proud of you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. The pleasure's mine. Thanks.
Great.
When I got shipped to Walter Reed, I was still still having a lot of difficulty dealing with what had happened and my hand and everything. I got put in a room with a young man, was 19 years old, had both legs gone, an arm and an eye gone. And for a month we were in the same room, and this guy kept me in stitches, laughing, joking, and to this day, I don't remember his name. I'm so upset with myself, but he made me aware that I am one lucky human being, because I knew I was going to walk out of that hospital, and he was never going to walk out of that hospital. And I think that's what helped me. I've never had a problem mentally. I've never had PTS, just a little bit, but I've never had anything serious like most of the guys have. And I owe it all to that gentleman. He just literally was the greatest thing that happened to me during my Vietnam era thing. He was just a wonderful, wonderful human being.
How did your military service affect your life?
Physically, it totally affected my life. It changed everything. I had to learn to do everything. I was always right-handed. Now I'm left-handed. I had to do everything differently. It took away. Well, it didn't. I can't say that, because I play golf now all the time. I played basketball, softball forever. Not as well as I could have, but I still played. I still competed. I still play golf, and I'm a pretty damn good golfer. But physically, it affected me, a lot. Mentally, I've never had a problem with it. Once I got over the hump that this is me, and there ain't nothing going to change it. I'm never going to get my hand back. I'm never going to get that time back. You know, deal with it. And that's what I did. Like I said, that guy in Walter Reed, lifesaver. I've never had a problem mentally with it. You know, it's never affected me. I never had nightmares. I've never had any of those problems like everybody has. So.
That's an example of some of the collections we have. I would encourage you to go to our website. We have a web presentation entitled Disabled Veterans, The Unhealed Wounds, that was put up on online a couple of years ago, that talks to about veterans who are serving and who served with disabilities. The other thing I would ask you, as I ask anyone who, if I have an audience, interview the veteran in your life. And everyone in this room has a veteran in their life. Come down to LM 109. We will give you the tools to do that. And please make a contribution to the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. I'll be followed by Steve Winnick from the American Folklife Center.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the speakers today, and of course Representative Duckworth, who's so inspiring to all of us, but also Bob Patrick, who is wonderfully inspiring to all of us as well. Thank you so much. I am Stephen Winnick. I am the writer and editor at the American Folklife Center, and I'm here to tell you about one of our collections, which is called StoryCorps. StoryCorps is a separate nonprofit corporation established by David Isay, a radio producer in New York. But when David set the corporation up, he was very much inspired by the Library of Congress and the collections that we have here. And I specifically mean the library's very rich oral history collections, particularly the ones in audio formats. And these collections include most of the extant recordings of interviews with formerly enslaved African Americans, so the ex-slave narratives. Most of those are here at the Library of Congress. An extensive oral history of jazz, for example, conducted by Alan Lomax with Jelly Roll Morton in 1938. And then firsthand reactions to the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941 and the September 11th attacks 60 years later. Those are just a few examples of the many, many oral history collections we have at the library. And because David was inspired by these collections, from the very beginning, the audio recordings made by StoryCorps have been brought here to the Library of Congress, where along with those other interviews I mentioned, they became part of the American Folklife Center archive. And here in the library, they not only constitute a unique collection in their own right, they join collections made by other contemporary oral history projects, including the Veterans History Project, which you just heard about, and the Civil Rights History Project, and other projects of that nature. And together they make the American Folklife Center one of the most significant oral history archives in the country. Now, in the StoryCorps model, interviews are conducted by ordinary Americans in all walks of life, mainly with people they know and love. And the process involves bringing a friend or a loved one to one of StoryCorps' fixed or mobile recording studios, which are known respectively as story booths and mobile booths. And the mobile booths, you've probably seen them, they're in those silver Airstream trailers, and they look great. We've had them here at the library a couple of times since I've worked here. And once you arrive at the booth, a StoryCorps facilitator will get you set up and get you adjusted to the equipment, and then it's up to you. You ask your interviewee questions or just let them tell you what they want to say. And the process typically results in a particular kind of oral history interview, and that is one that's intimate, that's detailed, and that's focused on personal history rather than societal history. It's the kind of setting where stories about dealing with and living with disabilities would typically come out. Now, based on index terms attached to these stories by StoryCorps, we can find out just which topics are most often discussed in these interviews. The top three topics, maybe not surprisingly, are relationships with parents, relationships with children, and relationships with siblings. So people are talking about their families. Also in the top 10 are workaday life, education, marriage, and death, as well as encounters with prejudice and intolerance. That's a particularly important topic in StoryCorps. And then if we broaden our glimpse to the top 20, we find urban and town life, we find teachers and education, traumatic memories, and coming-of-age stories. So clearly these recordings contain the perspectives, recollections, and opinions of a wide range of ordinary Americans on a wealth of intimate topics. And these are topics for which unguarded firsthand accounts are actually kind of rare. So it's really nice to have this large archive of such stories. And so if you're writing a social history of marriage, for example, an examination of these stories can really be invaluable. And there's a lot of other topics just like that. Now, the information on the number of stories that I'm giving you in individual topics comes from a controlled vocabulary of index terms that's added to the interviews by StoryCorps staff just after they're done. So they're tagged with metadata that we receive when we get the interviews. And in this list of terms, there's only one term specifically related to disability, and that is developmental disability. And there are several hundred stories in that category. But we know that there are many more inspirational stories about disabilities in all the other categories as well. And we welcome researchers of all kinds who want to use the collection and find these stories. So to explain how that works, currently, because of our agreement with StoryCorps, only the materials they make available through their website are online to be listened to. And you can search those from anywhere, and there are several dozen stories about disabilities there in that collection. However, StoryCorps was the American Folklife Center's first born digital collection, and it came to us with metadata, as I've said, from StoryCorps. And what that means to you is that very little processing has to be done to these collections relative to, say, a collection of old discs or old manuscripts that we get in order to make them ready for people to listen to. So because of that, we do have many thousands of interviews available to be listened to in the Folklife Reading Room, and you can come to the library and do that. And the best way to do that is to get in touch with the American Folklife Center staff in advance, just because we can search that database and find stories on the topics that you're most interested in advance if you do that. And our email address is folklife@loc.gov. You can also look us up and call us on the phone and get yourself an appointment to come and look through this archive. And then when you come to the Folklife Reading Room, which is over in the Jefferson Building, we'll connect you to a workstation where you can listen to interviews on any topic that is of interest to you, but in particular, disability topics, we can search those out for you. So I know that you're eager to find out what some of these stories sound like, and I'm going to play some excerpts now, selected actually by staff from the OED at the library. So these are selected by staff members with disabilities. So let's hear the first one. This is a story by a man named Jack Richmond about a severe industrial accident that caused him to have an amputation.
When you were 2 months old, I had a pretty severe accident at work. The forklift that I was driving turned over on me and crushed my leg below the knee. And initially when they told me I would lose my leg, I was in denial and disbelief and kind of like, what, why, can't you fix it? But it just couldn't be saved.
And you had a brand new daughter, me. What were you thinking?
I thought about you a lot. Sometimes I worried about how you would feel growing up with a father who had an artificial leg or whatever, so.
I always thought it was pretty cool. I didn't really know any different.
I had a young family, and in a lot of ways it motivated me to get up and to get going. 2 months after my accident, I went back up to the hospital, and I said, I want to talk to other amputees and tell them it'll be okay. And they said, well, that's a nice idea, but you're really not trained as a counselor or anything like that, and we can't just let you come in and just talk to patients. And as I was leaving the hospital, the chaplain saw me and remembered me and asked me what I was doing there. He said, well, can you come back on Saturday? And I said, okay, not knowing really what was going to happen. He trained me as a volunteer chaplain, gave me a badge and said, now you can go talk to everyone in the hospital. And I remember one young man that lost his leg below the knee, very similar to me. I came in, I just started talking to him and said, you're going to get through this, you're going to survive. And he just started turning red in the face. He says, look, I'm tired of you people coming in here and telling me that I'm going to be okay. And then it was like I realized I was wearing long pants. He had no idea that I was an amputee. So I put my leg over on the side of his bed, pulled my pants leg up, and I said, about 2 years ago, I was in the room across the hall. He didn't say anything else, but the tears just started rolling down his face. And he thanked me and I left.
My whole life growing up, I saw you always helping other people. I know that you're
Yeah.
not very boastful about it, but I guess it's really taught me a lot. So, thank you.
You know, you're truly blessed when God gives you the opportunity to help someone else. That's our purpose in life.
And just to explain, if you couldn't read it on the screen, that is his daughter that he's speaking with, and that's the way StoryCorps interviews typically work. It's a friend or loved one who does the interview. Here's a story about a cognitive disability story. It's a story actually about being committed to a psychiatric facility, and again, it's a father telling his daughter the story.
At the time, there was a lack of other resources for what a family could do, and they had a family member who was not well. Having no other choice, my parents had me committed. I was put into a small room, locked, bars on the door. The doctor told my parents that I was hopelessly insane, that I would never leave Bryce, that they should visit me less. At home, they should speak of me less, and at a point, they should move on with their lives and leave me behind.
Do you remember anything that happened to you in the hospital?
Yes. I began to be given shock treatments. My older sister, Kay, visited, and I spoke with a great feeling about it and asked that she have them stop. Kay said that she would, and as the day went on, I spoke with the doctor. I said, "Doctor, I'm not supposed to get a shock treatment today." Permission had been removed by my family. He looked at me and he said, "Get up on the table." And I do remember the slam of the electricity through my head. Some years after I looked at my psychiatric records, and Kay had removed family permission for them to give me shock treatments.
How did you get out?
In a word, I lied. I started studying television programs. I would just watch people, listen to how they interacted. I knew that to the degree that someone seemed normal, the doctors, the nurses, they were more interested in thinking of that person as someone who could leave Bryce Hospital.
Watching how you have lived your life makes me think that it is possible to fight through things and to live. I think it sort of made me brave. Thank you, Dad.
Thank you, Glenn.
And I'll give one more example, which is also a parent and child story. This is about Tim Harris, who has Down syndrome and helped his father start a restaurant.
Tim, talk about the day the restaurant opened. What was that like for you?
It felt awesome. I wanted to own a restaurant ever since I was a kid. That was my dream.
So when somebody comes to your restaurant for the first time, when do they get to see you?
When they come to that front door, and when they see me, they'll just melt into my arms for a hug.
So what's the hard part about having Down syndrome?
In school, I remember some kids called me the R word. I was not happy.
When you were in high school, how did you decide that you wanted to go to college?
I wanted to learn to be independent so I can become a businessman.
When your mom and I dropped you off that first day, Tim, we really didn't want to leave. Maybe around 2 o'clock, you looked at your watch and said, "I think you guys better get back to Albuquerque. It's a long drive." And I still remember what it felt like to get in that car and drive away. It was one of the most scary and sad moments of my life. What was that like for you?
I pretty much stayed in my room because I was upset missing my mom and dad. That was the saddest part. I cried in my pillow. My pillow was nothing but tears. So I decided to knock it off and make friends. It didn't take long.
Did you have parties in the dorm and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, dance parties.
So when you meet families in the restaurant and other places that have babies and little kids with Down syndrome, what kind of advice do you have for those families?
I think those families have somebody very special. Families tell me, "You inspired my kid. there's hope for my son or daughter. And when I see people with disabilities, they tell me, Tim, I want to be like you. It's pretty cool. Hey Dad, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
How does it feel having a son with a disability?
You know, Tim, when you were born, I was filled with a lot of doubts about whether I could be a good enough dad to be your dad. And many years later now, I'm so happy to have you in my life. I'm very, very proud of you and what you've become.
Dad, you are the most loving dad ever. And Mom too. You guys are my superheroes. And having you in my life, makes me special.
So as you can see, we have many inspiring stories, and I should say that the clips that you've been listening to were edited for the radio, and so they have nice music, and they're selected in a certain way. We have the full interviews, so we have more with all of these people. Each interview lasts probably about 35 to 45 minutes. So we have more interview material with these folks and with hundreds of other people who have disabilities. And we would love to see you come over and visit us in the Folk Life Center reading room, and we look forward to seeing you there. I'm going to be followed by my friend and colleague, Eric Eldridge. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My job is pretty easy here. It's basically to tell you about the Library of Congress website, www.loc.gov/disability awareness. There's a wealth of information that can be found on the website itself, and we want to encourage you to look at the website. And if you remember the library's former phrase, it said, log on, click around, and learn something. And if you do this, you'll be able to see a lot of information based on the library's collections itself. This is the website, and it's been created here in the library showing and showcasing the library's collections. You'll find information about each Disability Employment Awareness Month. You'll find information, well, right on top it says a conversation with Tammy Duckworth, and it has the Veterans History Project interview that you just saw. It also has Stevie Wonder, our collections related to Helen Keller, and talks about the Americans with Disabilities Act and our recent events. And we push all of our webcasts and our information there. One thing that you may not find, though, on the side is if you look at people, and then it says find out more about these individuals. It opens to a PDF file that lets you actually look at the Library of Congress collections in a unique way. For example, there's information about Jose Feliciano, Frida Kahlo, a great print from Prints and Photographs. I don't know if you can see this. Ray Charles and his teeth is actually a keyboard. But more importantly are the citations below it and interesting things that you'll learn. Here's Harry Belafonte. Did you know that Harry Belafonte had a disability? It brings up an interesting point for us because when people look at these, I was talking with a colleague who looked at that and said, oh, Harry Belafonte, what's wrong with him? And it shows our mindset and the transformation for that person in that moment to realize that we don't look at people with disabilities as what's wrong with them. The Office of Opportunity, Inclusiveness, and Compliance, the Office of Support Operations, has been doing a great job of talking to the library about these conversations in a more in-depth way by doing briefings to talk about what it means to have a different mindset about people with disabilities and about accessibility. We want to encourage you, everyone here in the library, and those of you that view this webcast later, to look at this, log on, click around, and learn something. And I'll leave my part right there and move on with our program. I have been asked by the OED to tell you that they have offered her a plaque with the presentation for today, but as she wheeled off, we didn't even have time for a photo op with her. At this time, I would like to introduce to you Karen Keninger to bring some wrap-up comments for today's program.
Thank you, Eric. I was looking at my watch and I see that I have 5 minutes, which is good because I didn't think I'd have any time at all. Necessity is the mother of invention. And it is through necessity that we have a lot of the things that we have in our world, because people tend to be pretty complacent about the way that they live, and we've always done it this way, and we're going to continue to do it this way until they can't. And then they start inventing things. We talked about curb cuts earlier. We talked about prosthetics getting better and better, but we also have things like, optical character recognition, for example, which is an invention specifically for blind people initially. We have the veterans to thank for some of the advances, many of the advances in the world of disability. It was through the veterans after World War I that the seeing eye dog was pioneered and brought to America. It was through the veterans. They have lots of money to put behind things. See, this is part of the thing. But after World War II, it was in the Veterans Administration that the long white cane was developed and perfected to the degree that it could be much more practical than the heavy sticks that people had to use before that. So there are a lot of things that we have today that are the result of people needing a better way to do the things that they want to do and not able to do it. We have a tendency to look at a person with disability and say, gosh, how could you ever do that? What I would challenge you to do from now on is to say, show me how you will do that. Because that's a very different mindset, and it's only by understanding that it can be done that you will believe in that person's ability to do their job, to raise their family, to live in the world alongside of everybody else. When I was a young mother, I was taking my child home from the hospital, and my pediatrician said to me, so, who's going to take care of this baby? I was really kind of shocked. He did not say to me, so tell me how you're going to take care of this baby. He didn't say that at all. He just said, who's going, it was this assumption thing that Eric just mentioned. Many of us who have disabilities have dealt with those kinds of assumptions, those kinds of experiences throughout our lives, and they do get kind of tiresome, I will tell you that. But the fact is that we have the capabilities, we have the abilities, we have the knowledge, we have the ways of doing the things that we want to do, because there's more than one way to skin a cat. And when you think about how you got here to the library today, Tammy came rolling in on her chair. She probably went faster than the rest of us. I strolled in with my dog. We went quite a ways too, and then he's peeking his little nose out under the thing, you know. Some of us took the metro. Some of us walked from home. Some of us drove in. I pity anybody who has to drive in this city, by the way. There's more than one way to do every single thing that we do day in and day out. And people who have disabilities have simply found ways to do the things they want to do in ways that they can. So it's not a matter of I can't. It's not a matter of I have to give this up because I can't do it. It's a matter of how am I going to do this because I want to. That's what we have to think about, and that's what we have to focus on. Thank you all very much for coming today. It's been a pleasure. We've had a great program. I'm going to have to go click around on that website or two and see some of those things. So thank you all very much for coming.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.